that our next guest, his grandfather, on March 5th, 1946, changed the world forever. Our guest's great-grandfather went to Fulton, Missouri, and gave a speech at Westminster College and talked about the Iron Curtain that is falling on Eastern Europe. Of course, I'm talking about Winston Churchill, and his great-grandson has written a new book called God and Churchill, How the Great Leader's Sense of Divine Destiny Changed His Troubled World and Offered Hope for Others. Jonathan Sands, welcome to the Big 550 KTRS here in St. Louis.
Thank you very much indeed. It's a pleasure to be here.
Where does Winston Churchill's great-grandson live these days?
I live in Houston, Texas. I was a very sensible Brit. I came over to America and I married an American, and we have a beautiful little 19-month-old son. And as I say, we're living in Houston.
And you grew up in England, I'm assuming?
Yes. Yeah, I was in England for just over 30 years.
And so growing up as the great-grandson of Winston Churchill, are there monuments? Are there stories? What is it like to grow up as Winston Churchill's great-grandson?
Well, first of all, it obviously is a very awesome responsibility. I didn't know a great deal about or at least I didn't appreciate a great deal about my great-grandfather until I was a lot older. And then suddenly, was studying the history, I was realizing, wow, this is amazing. But it's quite awe-inspiring. It's very humbling. It's something that, you need to take seriously, and it's a legacy that you have a responsibility to pass along, I believe.
Do people treat you differently when they find out who you are? Do you get a better seat at the table? Do you get better tickets to the play? Any perks come along with, or just how does life change once somebody finds out you're the great-grandson of one of the most powerful leaders the world has ever known?
Certainly people sort of look at you slightly differently, yes. As for the free tickets or the tickets here, tickets there, I can't answer that. I've never sort of tried it or anything like that. But yes, when people hear you're Winston Churchill's great-grandson, they go, wow. And it's as if they think I've done something, and I haven't. This was, God put me into this family. I really didn't do anything. If you met Winston Churchill, it would be amazing. He was the man who actually did something.
Yeah. Jonathan Sands, our guest, his book is called God and Churchill. What is the premise of the book?
Well, we wrote God and Churchill really for three major reasons. The first was to disprove the erroneous belief that Churchill was either an agnostic or an atheist. Secondly, was to use the well-documented historical evidence to show the times when God did intervene in Churchill's life as he believed. And then thirdly, really, was to give hope to the rest of the world that if God did intervene in Churchill's life and did intervene during the Second World War, it's entirely possible that he intervenes in the world today and indeed in our individual lives.
Are you a Christian, I'm assuming?
I am now, yes. I walked away from God for many, many years, and actually it was this book that brought me back to God.
Is this a Christian book? Is it a history book?
It's okay. It's a crossover market. It's not a religious book from the point of view. It's not sort of telling you about how to walk a religious life. It is merely an exploration into the faith side of my great-grandfather. It is evidence that strongly supports his own belief that his life was both directed and protected by what he referred to as divine intervention.
I had no idea that anybody thought Churchill was an agnostic.
Oh, yes. Yeah, they've written him off as an agnostic and an atheist, which he most definitely was not. And the evidence that we provide absolutely changes that completely.
Huh. Why would somebody say that? I mean, what did he say anything, or was this? Where was that coming from?
Well, when Churchill was young, in his early 20s, he was in the 4th Hussars, and he was over in India. And it was at that time that he had a complete crisis in faith. And many people have seen that, and they've kept Churchill in that. They've ignored the fact that later on, very shortly after that, he actually changed. and recognized that God was there and that God was definitely protecting him. So I don't know why the evidence has been missed. I can't answer for other historians. All I can tell you is that the evidence that we have found is overwhelming.
The book is called God and Churchill. Winston Churchill's great-grandson is with us. Jonathan, you pronounce it Sands, but it looks like Sandys, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, that is correct.
So when people look for the book, it's Sandys, but you pronounce it Sands. So it's Jonathan Sands, and the book is called God and Churchill. All right, Jonathan, because America is so intertwined with Churchill, Churchill's divine inspiration, as you say, sort of changed the course of Great Britain. It also changed the course of America and changed the course of the world. Give us one or two little insights into where God spoke to and sort of directed Churchill along the way.
Well, the first instance that we see of this intervention comes when Churchill was 16 years old, and he was talking to a friend of his at Harrow School called Merland de Grasse Evans, and they were having a conversation about their potential futures. And Churchill suddenly started off by saying that London will one day be attacked, and I shall lead the forces of London and the empire to victory. And it was an incredible prophecy that he gave, and at the time obviously looked at as very arrogant. But so taken was Merland by what his friend had said, he wrote it down, and many years later sent a letter to my great uncle Randolph, who was Winston Churchill's son, who was writing Churchill's biographies. And he said, this is an account of a story that I really think you should know about. And so, although it doesn't appear in Randolph's biography, it does appear in Martin Gilbert's works. And so it really was an amazing find.
It's a strange thing to say for a 16-year-old boy.
Yes, it is. And obviously he would have been looked at as incredibly arrogant had it not happened. But it's amazing the amount of times that great-grandpapa predicted things that genuinely would happen. And on this occasion, it was absolutely impossible for him to predict that London would be attacked, for him to predict that he would be leading the forces of London and England, and also that he would lead them to victory. So for it to actually happen the way that he said it would, religions around the world consider that a prophecy, not a prediction.
Give me some type of intervention during the war at the depths. Is there one when Berlin was bombing London in the Battle of London, or at the depths of the war, or when he needed him most? Give me one of those.
Okay, there was one occasion, and this was recorded by his bodyguard, Walter Thompson. Great-grandpapa used to like to walk in the evenings in St. James's Park, and it's not very far from number 10. And on the way back from the walk, the sirens started going, and they heard a massive explosion. And Walter Thompson and great-grandpapa looked back, and almost directly where Churchill had been standing moments before this massive explosion had taken place, Churchill would have almost certainly been killed. And Walter Thompson was a man who fretted around anyway. He didn't like the fact that Churchill put himself in danger. And Churchill looked at him and said, "Don't worry, there is someone else looking after me apart from you." Well, Thompson misunderstood this and said, "Do you mean Sergeant Davis?" And Churchill smiled and said, "No." And he pointed up to the sky and he said, "There is a person up there who has a purpose for me, and he intends to see that that purpose is fulfilled." So we see great-grandpapa acknowledging the fact that he believes in God, and also acknowledging the fact that he believes that God has intervened in his life. That's just one instance in amongst many. And we have highlighted three stories,
Sure.
Three major stories in the book.
The book is called God and Churchill. Jonathan Sands, Winston Churchill's great-great-grandson, has written a book about all of this. Powerful leaders and leaders of great men with great power think they're all special, think they're never going to die. FDR never thought he was going to perish. He thought he could defy the odds and sort of live forever. Isn't that part of the makeup of a powerful man at a powerful time with a lot of power?
It's the height of arrogance to believe that you're never going to actually die. Churchill knew that at some stage he would die. He just knew that he needed to fulfill his purpose. Now, in contrast to Hitler, who actually did believe that he was immortal, Adolf Hitler put himself equal to Jesus. And he once said to Martin Bormann in a private conversation that what Jesus was not able to finish, I, Adolf Hitler, will complete. And so Hitler saw himself very much as immortal. It does help that you are prepared to take risks, but there are some risks that would be considered very foolhardy.
Yeah.
And Churchill clearly had a confidence that he was protected properly and had obviously seen this throughout his life to be able to actually step out and take the enormous risks he did take, not just during the war, but throughout his entire life.
One of the great head-scratching moments in all of human history is in the Potsdam Conference, where Winston Churchill, Truman, and Stalin are there, and Churchill, while at the conference, is voted out of office by the people.
Yes.
People don't know. I mean, that's unheard of. I mean, that's how he can rally a nation and beat back fascism and then be voted out of office while they're divvying up the proceeds is something that's a head scratcher to me.
Well, if I may, I can answer that, and please, all men, pay attention to what I'm about to say because it's very, very important.
Yes.
If you want to succeed in life and you have a wife, listen to her. If my great-grandfather had listened to my great-grandmother Clementine and had not made a speech during that election period likening the socialists to the Gestapo, then it's very probable that he would have won the general election. As it turns out, as great-grandmama said, it was probably a blessing in disguise because Churchill had been on the go all the way through the 1920s and the 1930s. And then war struck in 1939, and in 1940 he found himself as prime minister. So now, for a further 5 years, he was absolutely on top of his game. He needed a break. Remember, the man was started off as prime minister in his late 60s. So it was quite something for him to be as energetic as he had been. So yes, to kick him out of office would have been considered unfair. Potentially it was his fault. In fact, almost definitely it was his fault. But he needed the break. He needed the rest.
There you go. Listen to your wife. The book is called God and Churchill. Jonathan Sands is our guest. He now lives in Houston. He's the great-grandson of Winston Churchill. Jonathan Sands. It's spelled S-A-N-D-Y-S. You can get it at allamazon.com and bookstores everywhere online. God and Churchill is the book. Jonathan, thank you very much for your time. Good luck.
Thank you very much indeed. Bless you. Bye-bye.
You got it. 921 here, Big 550 KTRS.